It is impossible to think industries without the use of simulation. Nevertheless, we sometimes have the feeling that we're only at the beginning, and the adoption of computational modeling and simulation and in medicine and medtech is only, well, a dwarf. It can be much more. What are the reasons, up to your opinion, and what do we need to speed up the process?
That's a very good question, and thank you for asking that. I've got a feeling that we've been at the beginning of the adoption for the last 10 years. And I guess that my co-panelists here will share this feeling. Some of the good element is that we are improving. And when I see the growth of the revenue, to be very pragmatic, the growth of the revenue for healthcare at Ansys, this is accelerating dramatically. This is the fastest growing industry at Ansys. So this is a good sign. Having said that, I don't have a full answer to this question because we've got all the components. We've got the right tool. We're seeing Microsoft willing to help. So we've got a computational power. We've seen some fantastic research model from Liesbet. So we've got all these elements. Payman was showing that we've got the regulatory element. I just got the feeling that there are some kind of inertia. What was very important during the last 10 years is that there was a lack of awareness. People didn't know what was in silico, whether we can really trust that, and so on. With all the publications that you were referring to, now that there is a relatively good awareness. Now we really need to push and to make sure that all the industry, whether they're coming from the medical device, from the pharma, from the software and environment and the hardware, they're putting enough focus on that and not just on other industry like aeronautic, high-tech, and so on. If we can do that, and if we can work very closely with academic, that would be important, academic and startup company. Because unfortunately, as we can see in all the industry, the real innovation is now done in startup and SME. And after that, we can transfer that in the large element. So we need to make sure that we facilitate this environment. And I'm blaming myself as part of Ansys. We can do more than that, although things are slowly improving.
Thank you. And I will pass this on to Payman Afshari. When we take a look at an international comparison, are there countries that are already more advanced than others in this respect? Is there a difference between US, North America, Europe, and Asia?
Sure. In terms of adoption of in silico technologies, I assume the question, right? So the adoption is very much dependent on two things. So if you have to look at the product life cycle from where things get designed all the way when things get cleared, and I think the first half of it, which is the discovery ideation side, you'll find many companies based on their experience and expertise and their the advancement of the people who are in that field. They're using modeling simulation. In silico technologies are growing there, and that's probably the growth area that maybe Thierry's referring to. That area it's getting recognized as a good tool, and I think that's going to be fairly international. You find as need grows, you find that. I think the other end is towards the end side, which is when you need the evidence for a third party, which is regulatory, and that really put the acceleration on the user model into a much higher level of evidence generation. It means that you have to have, as with the ASME VMB40, is like trying to really fill that space, that gap, and in that case, what's easier has been in the US because of that's more like structural, how the regulatory is structured in US versus other countries. And it's because you have partners within the industry, within the FDA, that we can talk about regulatory science, and and develop methods, tools, standards that we can allow for models and simulation be part of that evidence generation. So that is and we look at the other partners across the world. They're slowly coming on board, but that is one reason why it's accelerated in the US is to having a partner on the agency side who advocates for faster regulatory science development.
So
throwing that question, or I would like to comment also on this one. So I think there's definitely a difference in if you compare US, Europe, and Asia in the adoption of in silico and how you can implement it into markets, etc., or use it for notified bodies. In Europe, mostly not notified bodies and auditors of notified bodies don't know about digital evidence at all, or even the term in silico. So it's a lot about education and how you educate them, and the centralization in the US is really an effort, or really an advantage, that you have the possibilities to the FDA says, I want to have some regulatory science on this topic because it's a really hype topic like in silico, and we need regulatory science in this. So in Europe, we are lacking really of this regulatory science, and maybe Lies, you can give a comment on what we could do in Europe to foster in silico in silico methods with regulatory science.
So it seems that regulatory is one of the major roadblocker when it comes to in silico methods in medical technologies.
If I can maybe comment on what Jan has just said, in terms of regulatory science, there's also a difference in culture when it comes to FDA and working with industry between the US, so with FDA in the US, and then the organizations in Europe, where it is easier from an academic point of view to work with regulators than it is with as an industry. So they're a bit more careful, let's say. But then on the other hand, academia and regulatory science, there is a bigger gap because it's a bit further from their bedside. So it takes longer to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And I think organizations like the VPH Institute and the Avicenna Alliance are really important in that respect, because you bring people together who not necessarily, as you've seen for my own research, are at the level where they would be able to talk to the regulator or would need to talk to a regulatory agency for their own research, but who are interested in helping to build this whole pathway. And it is when you have those organizations that you bring that together that you can start pushing also in Europe. And we have been doing that for the past 10 years. And you see now that people are really, either they're tired of us whining, or they're tired of seeing the competition in the US get further ahead of them, or they're simply, they're recognizing that this is now what they're confronted with and what they need. So the notified bodies, EMA, they're now all on board. And so that means that we can start making progress. Like we have, for instance, the white paper with EMA published on the regulatory, on how to translate, let's say, the VMV40 philosophy into a European context. And so these examples are now happening more and more.
And I think just to confirm that within the FDA, there's a wall, there's the reviewer side, which is the Office of Review, Device Review, and there's the Office of Science and Engineering. So the Office of Science and Engineering is the one that's most of the collaboration happens. The review side, so they keep that independent, right? So that's the side that has no influence on, whether your device is approved or not, cleared or whatever, right? So that's important. So that's the science side. The regulatory science is owned by a separate entity.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one comment I like to add is that when we are engaging with the EMA, with the FDA, with the notified body and others, either as the Avicenna Alliance or the VPHI, when people are fearing a conflict of interest, we never see any strong pushback. People are always interested to say, okay, yes, we want to learn more about in silico. I've got the feeling that, as I suggest, there is no roadblock in front of us, but there are a lot of elements a little bit everywhere, and we need to connect the dots. And that's why it's very interesting to have the Avicenna Alliance, the VPHI here, where all these people, like DePuy Synthes and others, are members of the alliance. It's okay, well, the notified bodies that don't fully understand what is in silico method, but they are not opposed to that. Let's go to them to inform them and to let them know about that. And what we found out when we are engaging with them is that they're keen to learn about that. But at the same time, they are telling us, okay, but we don't have the right regulatory framework in Europe. perfect. So we can go to the people developing this kind of framework in order to see what's going on. Even when we are talking with the FDA, there is no competition between FDA and Europe. Although we are taking advantage of that, we are teasing people in Europe to say, okay, but look at what's going on the other side of the pond. But people are willing to collaborate. I'm very pleased to see that there is a kind of worldwide interest and desire to make sure that this kind of in silico method could be adopted everywhere. Because to some extent, if we are adopting in silico method in Europe and in US, but not in China and other Asian countries, we still need to do this kind of clinical trial, and therefore we'll be slowing down the medical adoption. We've seen with COVID that we cannot afford to do that. But one of the key elements is to see this kind of positive attitude and the strong need for VPHI Avicenna to say, okay, let's pick up the ball, let's connect the dots, let's talk to the different people and see how we can progress.
So coming back to you, Liesbet, because you're coming directly from research, beside regulatory affairs, what are the reasons why research projects are often not or too late transferred to industry? And what can we do to accelerate this process?
I think it comes down to incentives there again. As scientists, well, everybody is curious, but as scientists, we are rewarded most, let's say, for these initial developments, for finding a new gene, developing a new model. But then, in order for this model to make it to industry, to regulatory science, to be able to talk to the universities, we've seen the example in the In Silico World project now. For one of the applications in the project, they recently submitted a briefing book, but this took 1 year of work by somebody, during which time there is no publication that you can get from that. It's not that I can go to my university board and say, look what I did. I worked the whole year on this thing. So that means that the incentives aren't there, or they are not properly valued. And the same way as, academia is also a business, we need to keep our group going. We need to have our output so that we can get our projects and that we can keep the science going. But it's in the interface where like two separate blocks, and they need to be interfaced a bit more. And there needs to be incentives to really, for people to go that extra mile. Not everybody has to do that, but it needs to be evaluated more properly. And that is something that can only come with more awareness. There is now pushback on this very high focus on impact factors and publications. So people are now more starting to realize that there is additional things that you can do as a scientist. So I think this is going to help also this translation. Plus, sometimes it's a matter of not knowing it exists. And I think initiatives, again, organizations like VPHI and Avicenna are very important, because then as an individual scientist, you can talk to somebody from the FDA. Otherwise, I would not know where to start. And we're now putting one of the activities that hasn't been mentioned today, I think, but that is going to be important, is the good simulation practice that is being worked on by the whole community in the In Silico World community of practice. And with the task force in the Avicenna Alliance, where it would be like the starting point. You go there to find all the information and then the links to all the different things that you need to do if you want to start doing in silico modeling in a way that will allow you to actually translate it to industry and to the patients.
And it's also maybe then as it's said, so funding for regulatory research and regulatory science. So it's mostly in the most funding and grant projects, it's that you're doing regulatory science on within the project as a part of it, but not being it as itself. So there should be maybe a funding also for this direct grants for regulatory science in Europe.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the regulators are very much asking for this as well, especially at the EMA. So they have a scientific background, so they would want to participate and really lay this out.
You were right, Lies, to mention that we need more communication. At your initiative, we've got this kind of alternance between the webinar, between industry and academic as part of the Avicenna Alliance. Now, I've been amazed. Each time we see a webinar, where one member of the VPHI is presenting his research, I can see a lot of value that we can exploit for the industry. We need to transfer that. I'm simply not aware of what's going on everywhere. We need to pull this kind of communication to see what is there. The other point is that the importance of a group like CADFEM Medical, all this startup, SME and so on, because sometimes large company like Ansys, J&J and so on, it's okay, that's very promising solution over there, but a little bit too immature in order to transfer that. So if we can work with a group like CADFEM Medical, we'll do the kind of the interface between pure research and real business for that. That's one way to where we are sharing the risk. So awareness, collaboration, and so on. And that's why, Lies, you've got such an important activity as the Research and Technology Working Group leader at the Avicina Alliance to get the funding from Europe, but also to make sure that we know what each other are doing.
So referring to the survey we had in the break, do you think that there's enough research funding nationally and in the European Union available to bring in silico technologies into practice? It's an open question to the panel.
I think if you look at the last call in Horizon 2020, for instance, there was a call on accelerating uptake of in silico methods for the development of medical products. And 4 projects have been funded, and one of them, the In Silico World project, was explained here, where it is really the point of identifying these barriers and trying on all of these different levels, you know, to take a few steps forward, to work on available data sets, to work on getting the regulators up to speed, to work on maybe standards. So there are funding calls, and I think also the more we show promise to Europe, the more inclined they're going to be to take us seriously and to keep wanting to push this, because then they don't want to let go of that benefit. So it is kind of a vicious circle.
So from my perspective, as an, I would say from a startup position, I see there's a lot of research funding. We also do grants and fundings and having a lot of fundamental work developed in these projects. But what we're kind of lacking is really in Europe and nationally for smaller companies and innovators to help really academia and research put it into practice. So there is no funding because it's not fundamental research. It's really research to get it on the street and get it to the clinicians. But mostly that's the most complicated way. So verification and validation is tremendously expensive, and also building infrastructures and having a medical product that can be used at clinics. So that's really very, very complicated. This is possible through invest, etc. But funding in little ways could help a lot in these cases from my perspective.
I think Europe tried to do that with the 3rd pillar of research funding that they now have for more the innovation side and the translation side, but I think the focus remains that it should on the innovation, and that's not what you want. I mean, it's the not so sexy and tedious work of translating this that requires actually more funding. It's like with any medical product, it's the preclinical phase that is super expensive before you can start thinking about the patient. So it is, there. Of course, there's not going to come any spectacular things out of that, but maybe a solid project should actually be something spectacular.
Yeah, I think it is as good as it is. So the funding doesn't have to pay your clinical studies, but at the beginning and just funding of it and kind of creating an ecosystem, which a lot of startups could use to get their products into the market. So as the KU Lueven and you, Liesbet, doing a lot of effort and putting a lot of effort in getting material data, etc., that are public and that are validated, etc. So that's something that also could be beneficial, and also not making too big Horizon Europe research grants where 10 to 12 companies are involved, and a small startup just is cannot wait as long till the grant is finished and then getting a product out. So that's too shorter innovation cycles need to be implemented in these funds and grants, from my perspective.
May I ask, Payman, what is the situation in North America? Is there a lot of funding for startup, for research, for academic people? What is the situation?
Unfortunately, I don't have. I'm not in that stream, so don't know how the funding works at this point. So I'm not sure.
So
But I think maybe there the important part is also that we talk to the people, to the funding agencies, and the European Commission has been receptive. I mean, they are open to discussions. And so that is important, that we can show that we are not just showing up and saying we need more money, but that we say, hey, this is what we've already done. And now we've encountered these problems. And in order to get to the next level, we need to have A, B, and C very specifically. And not always go for, I have another cool idea that want to get funding for. So if we are now doing this more in a better way, I think, than 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And that will help to try and hopefully create really the funding that is focused on the needs that exist in the field.
And indeed, we've been able to inform them quite a lot, and you can see the word in situ, even digital twin, are quite often appearing in the call. So that means that people are listening to us. I think that there are a lot of funding that Europe is bringing. Maybe we need to use them in a smarter way into the future so that we can do more with the existing funding.
So imagine we have some funding, we do a lot of good research at the university or somewhere else. How is your way to convince a highly innovative but somehow conservative medtech industry from your ideas?
I can just say that a lot of you see a lot of startups spun off from the universities in the US. It's not uncommon to see that around campus. You'll find many small companies coming out of that space, and then they look for funding, and for seed money, whether that's going to be from venture capitalists or maybe something that's directly impacts a company's product line. Maybe then you'll find the companies are willing to invest. It's typically depending on where they are, how close they are to become a realization of a product versus a concept being developed. You'll find different, risk, right? So you'll find maybe harder to invest on concepts, you'll find more pivoting on something that's at the end, there's some benefit, right? Some financial. So there's always a lot of, risk reward drives all the conversation. So it's in the US, you'll find a lot of startups that going, and some they're successful, some may not be.
And there might be different kind of investment, because we might be talking about financial investment. This is one. I know that there are a lot of venture capitalists who can provide some money. One of the key investments that large medtech or software company can be doing is investing in their time and guidance. Showing some interest, and therefore this is helping this kind of startup to get more funding, giving them some kind of guidance, giving them access to some of our product and so on. It may seem like a kind of in-kind investment. That might be easier for large companies. I'm sure Payman, you and certainly me as well, it's easier for me to give grant access to our software than giving them some cash for that. So an easy way to move in this direction while we are bringing a lot of value. I think that the key investment is in value, whether it is in cash, in time, in guidance, and all these kind of things.
As a matter of fact, just maybe to add to that is that companies like, say, Johnson & Johnson, we have J Labs, which will provide space, material, and maybe sometimes even guidance to, as you mentioned, to startups. So we provide space if you go to Cambridge in Massachusetts, you find they provide, because it's very expensive, real estate expensive. So you find the company provide that, but you go through a process to get accepted to be given that space. So that's another way of providing support for startups as well. That's, as you said, it's not always seed money, but it could be other things too.
Sorry, Lies.
Go ahead, Jan.
Okay, thank you. So what we expected a lot is really a great advantage is if you can produce clinical evidence in early phases with research in academia. So for us, it was a very important connection point to do a lot of research and research grants together with companies. So getting big companies to go into research with small startups and academia to produce early stage clinical evidence and to see if ideas are really worth it going after and if they are feasible and relevant. So that helped us a lot. And you're having the possibility to give a benefit to academia. They can do research, they can do publications, etc. And startups have the possibility to build early clinical evidence and to get funding and seed funding afterwards.
Mm-hmm. I think two elements there are also very important. That's training and access to contacts, network. And the network can come with the training. There is more and more training schools available that will inform people of what are actually the next steps, because, well, that's not something that you might otherwise really realize or have to find yourself. But then those schools that are more focused on translational science, they will also provide networking to the people and training, Dragon's Den type of pitching exercises. How do you sell that? What should you focus on to get away from your researchy talks and your presentations at conferences and learn how to talk to other stakeholders? Biomedical scientists, we've learned to talk to clinicians, but then as a scientist, you also need to learn how to talk to academia, to industry. So these are all things that we should train people in and value more. And I think that is also happening. 1 in every 12 PhD students will become a professor. That means that there's a lot of people that will go to industry. And so if we train them right, we also gain that knowledge and again, the network.
Along this ecosystem, Lies, let me promote the conference that you are organizing, that the VPHI is organizing in September. I think that's one of the best opportunity to network. Hopefully it will be a physical event this year, but I would encourage anyone from a startup, large company, and academic people to attend this conference. Fantastic opportunity to network. And I'm not doing some sales promotion because this is a VPHI, but certainly we will be supporting that.
I think exactly that is what we tried to do with that conference, to set it apart from typical scientific conferences, is to have a good representation of industry, to have regulators there, to have policy makers there, and at least have those discussions. And that is what sets this apart. So it's, network and contacts.
And also to support Thierry as his function is in Avicenna Alliance. So I really can recommend being part of Avicenna Alliance and being part of the movement and taking it forward. So it helped us a lot also.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more about that, there's the Avicenna Day in February, where you can learn about the activities.